Welcome to another episode of The Warriors Walk. I'm Keith, and this is Todd. And today we're going to be talking about finding joy in the Christmas season, even if we're missing loved ones. So stay tuned for today's episode.
We were there a few days before Christmas, and it was very sobering. And that, our very first night, we lost 4 teammates and many others wounded on one operation. And the parable of the two homes and their foundation, right? And so this Christmas season, I would say it'd be a really good time to analyze what are you building your life on. I think I had 27 magazines for my M4. I had 24 HE rounds for my 203. I had multiple AT4 rockets, and because I was just like, I don't know when I'm coming back. They just like send me out into the jungle. If there was a camera in there, it would have looked pretty depressing. Like if it was the Truman Show, like here's this guy trying to play ping pong by himself and darts. And I do remember, though, they always talked about the Golden Pallet that would show up if you go to war. And so, lo and behold, the Golden Pallet arrived. It actually isn't golden, but like all the things on it made it gold. And so every weapon you've ever read about, every explosive, you name it, like it was all there. And it was just like
okay, this is
for
serious.
me. Yeah. They're like, you can carry it, you can take it. So
Now, Todd, you have been away from your family several Christmases throughout your Navy career, your deployment for a number of them. And people that are watching this today or listening to this today, they may not be in the same situation. They may not be in the military or away from their family physically, but they're missing loved ones because maybe this is the first Christmas they're facing after a death of a loved one. And so sometimes Christmas can be a fun, joyous season, to connect with family. And sometimes people dread it for whatever reason. Either they know that they're not going to be with family because of work, or it's not going to be quite the same as in the past because torn relationships or even losing a loved one. So today we're going to be talking about how to find that joy, even if you're missing loved ones. And in your 26 plus year Navy SEAL career, do you know, just an estimate, how many Christmases you were away?
I don't off the top of my head, but I know 2 significant ones that I remember that we can talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, so we'll be sharing some stories of very memorable Christmases for you. But yeah, I've prepared several different questions, just kind of interviewing you on this topic. Christmas is a big deal for my family. We have a big tradition, even on Christmas morning at my family's farm, where we get together for a big breakfast and all come together, cousins, aunts, uncles, and everything. And it started by my grandfather years ago, and we've carried on that tradition. And so Christmas is a very fond time in my family's life. We look forward to it. And I can imagine, though, once we, have, more people in my family that pass on, it's going to be more and more difficult because of the memories that we're sharing and even making each year. And so with that, what were some family traditions that you had growing up around Christmas? Like, what was Christmas like when you were growing up, and what was that like for you early on? Was it a fond environment that you recall?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like any kid, I think I enjoyed getting gifts, and I think when I was younger, I had no clue about giving gifts. I think it was more on the receiving end when I was younger. And we definitely had 2 sets of grandparents that lived within an hour of us, and so we certainly tried to see them either on Christmas Eve or Christmas. So a lot of times there's moving parts, even though where we live today, like we drive an hour every day just to go to eat a Taco Bell, right? Like it's crazy. Yeah. But as far as significant memories, like, a certain food or anything like that, I don't remember. I just remember, like any little kid, just staring at those boxes and doing my best to wonder, what might be in that box the next day. And then my generation, of course, our wish catalog was the giant Sears catalog, so that's where we would sit and ponder about those treasures.
Yeah. Now, okay, so do you have a favorite Christmas movie?
Favorite Christmas movie? For me, not so much when I was growing up, but since I've had a family, It's a Wonderful Life. Like we played every Christmas Eve. And certainly Elf has creeped in there, and we watched that.
For funny, I think you can't really compare to Elf. I mean,
you can't, and then the other one that's pretty popular in our house, my wife loves A White Christmas.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
those definitely make their rounds.
Yeah. Well, for me, this might be shocking to many people, but one of my favorite Christmas movies is The Holiday. It's like actually a romantic comedy.
Have
you ever seen it? You knew about it? That's not shocking to you, yeah. And so I don't know what it was. Yeah, it was just
never heard of it. Actually,
you never even heard of it. Okay, so maybe you should. I mean, it's actually pretty star-studded.
Like Hallmark.
Not as bad as Hallmark.
Okay.
It's actually, that's why I
No
kind of
offense,
liked
Hallmark.
it. Was like I was expecting Hallmark quality, like no plot, like very same.
There's a lot of death and tragedy. Then
Yeah. I mean, it's a good, it's pretty well written plot and stuff. So yeah, I won't spoil anything, but there's actually some good stars in there. So there's Kate Winslet, Cameron Diaz, Jack Black, Jude Law. There's a lot of famous actors even before that movie. They're pretty famous. So,
cool.
Anyways, check it out if you haven't seen it. Yeah, so we plan on watching that this Christmas season. Okay, so another lighthearted question before we get started. Do you remember your favorite Christmas gift that you've ever received? Like maybe when you were a kid.
Gift. Probably, I don't remember what it was called, but somewhere along the early years, I did get a six-wheeler that was hand cranked. And so you could crank it and you could rotate it right or left like a tank. And it was white and black.
So it's like, think like a bike, like a pedal type thing, or
think like or
is it like motorized?
A three-wheeler that's just manufactured or moved by your hands, with those cranks. And so, like, I was a beast in that thing. I was bound and determined to run over every bush. And so that was kind of fun. And then, of course, probably the classic was, my dad was a big motorcycle guy, and so I had motorcycles before bicycles. And so I had the Red Devil, I think around the age where I could crawl and walk. And then, from there, YZ80, moving on up the ranks. But certainly motorcycles were a big deal too.
Very cool. Yeah, that was, I have two memorable gifts. One was actually not too long ago, probably, less than 10 years ago. And the other one was when I was a kid. So I remember we had a very memorable Christmas with my dad. So my parents were divorced when I was growing up, and we spent Christmas with my dad one year, and he took us up to his hunting cabin that he was part of, and we celebrated Christmas there. We went and cut down a tree and set it up, made popcorn, decorations and stuff on the tree. And I remember that year, for whatever reason, like it wasn't even something that, like, I don't even know where it is today, but I remember I got a gumball machine. So it was like one of those things where you just put a coin in and you can twist it, get gumballs out. And that was a big deal. But then more recently, going into our gun past, my mom actually bought me an adult-sized Red Ryder BB gun.
Adult size?
Did you know that they made these?
I did not.
So yeah,
I have a Red Ryder.
But. Yeah, so the old school Red Ryder, which I had when I was a kid, but she got an adult size one. It was like a commemorative. Like I was like, this is pretty cool. I can like that.
That is cool.
Anyway, so some memorable some gifts over the years, but. Now, when you spent time away from loved ones during Christmas, how did that affect your relationship with your family? So when you're deployed and you kind of had to serve your country, how did that affect your relationships with your family and even your other teammates that you served with?
Yeah. So, the first deployment that I spent away from Christmas, I had no family, as far as wife and children. And so I was always gone away from my mom, and even my fiance at the time. So I don't know if it impacted me that much, and it was a war, so we were busy. So didn't spend a lot of time pondering. I think we all reflected for a few brief moments on Christmas Day, but we were busy. Yeah. And so, and then there was another deployment where that one was extremely lonely, but I was a senior guy, so I sent everyone home, and so I just kind of camped out in a warehouse by myself for just shy of 2 weeks before the next platoon got there. And so, but I would think for the most part, if you're fortunate enough to be stationed near a big-size base, the military does a good job of making you feel special. They roll out, they have very good meals, and usually the programming that's through AFV is coming to you is pretty decent, and so they do a good job. But a lot of times, depending on what unit you're in, you're not exposed to any of that stuff. So it can be very low.
People that may not know, what is AFV?
Armed Forces.
America's Funniest Videos?
Oh, you know what? I think it actually is. Maybe AFN. I don't know. Armed Forces Network. Maybe that's what I'm. Yeah.
AFN, okay.
I do watch AFV every Sunday night.
I was like, man, I didn't know they had a military program.
There. So, that's what my wife and do to wind down on Sunday night. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's just, and it's, their commercials are all propaganda. It's almost ridiculous. It's kind of comedy, though, for us in the military.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
But, yeah, when you talk about families, I think it really depends on the individual, right? Like, if a guy's newly married, then it's a big deal. Or if he just had his first kid, all those things come into play. And that's what's neat about, like, if, say, on average, you have 16 guys in a platoon together, and some of these, men and women listening, like, they might be in bigger groups, they might be in smaller groups. And so those dynamics play out differently. And so it's going to land on each heart differently. And so you just kind of play it like you see it.
Yeah. Now, what are some of the emotions that you might experience during Christmas while being deployed? So maybe even talk about the time. Are you are able to share any details about the one where you sent your guys home?
Sure. Yeah. So it was actually, I remember my son turned 16 during this deployment. And so I had gone online and actually bought him an airsoft MP5. And so he could torture his friends with it. And so it's super battery powered. But I was the senior guy in charge in East Africa. And so I packaged all my guys up because the work was done and we were waiting for the next platoon. So I sent them all home just a little bit, probably early December. And then I just kind of hanged out in this warehouse, and just kept things running until the next platoon got there. And then I did a little turnover with them for a few weeks. So that one was extremely lonely. Oh. And there was, again, no FaceTime yet and all those other nice things to check in with family. And so, and I think even the phone calls were kind of limited. And so it was email. Yeah. And, yeah, it was lonely. It was a lot of throwing darts and trying to play ping pong.
I was just saying, how did you? Because like when you're actually in battle or on a mission or something like that, it makes it easy because you're like not even thinking about it. But when you're just sitting in a warehouse by yourself,
it was Groundhog Day. It was like work out and eat, and then we did. And this isn't. Again, I realize most people watching, that we're pastors, but what we watched over there that was just mindless entertainment was we watched My Name Is Earl and Scrubs, and I would just sit there and let my brain get sucked out and watch those two goofy shows. So that helps some, but it was, if there's a camera in there, it would have looked pretty depressing. Like if it was the Truman Show, like here's this guy trying to play ping pong by himself and darts, and because our darts, darts was pretty entertaining. If you get a bunch of team guys together, usually. Then it becomes more of a bravery test, who wants to stand by the dartboard and have darts thrown at their head. And so it can get interesting.
Yeah. Now, there was one significant Christmas back in 1989 for you.
Yeah.
Can you share some details about that Christmas?
Sure. Yeah, so for the younger crowd listening, which stats tell us a lot of you may not remember Operation Just Cause, and that was where the United States of America sent us in to remove a dictator named Noriega out of Panama. And we were there a few days before Christmas, and it was very sobering. And that, our very first night, we lost 4 teammates and many others wounded on one operation. And then Christmas Day, my platoon was tasked to do a recon on Flamenco Island, which is where one of Noriega's homes was at. And myself and my LPO, the leading petty officer, so he was kind of like our sled dog boss. And he and I were the swimmer scouts. And I remember beforehand looking at imagery of the island, and there was a line in the water in this cove, and I just asked a simple question. I said, could that be a shark net? And they're like, be quiet, new guy, you're just scared. I was like, well, it's not that I'm scared, I'm just asking a question. Well, fast forward to that night, dark 30, he and I slide off the boats, and as we're swimming along and being very quiet, it was one of those nights where the moon would peek in and out behind the clouds. I get rammed in the side hard enough that I ran into my buddy and splashed the water, and it really ticked him off. He grabbed me. He's like, what are you doing? You're going to give us away and get us killed. I was like, something hit me. And he's like, whatever. I was like, okay, I just made this up. So we keep swimming. I get hit again, this time a little bit harder. And then he's really furious with me, and he's like, switch sides. And I'm like, well, that's genius. Like, we're in the ocean. I don't think it's going to matter if we switch sides. But we switch sides. And then lo and behold, something hit him, and then he's climbing up on top of me. And he's like, something hit me, Petey. And I was like, yeah, no kidding. And it was right there. I mean, I really do remember this distinctly. The moon broke through the clouds, and dorsal fins were circling all around us. Now, originally, I think I started the tale with 12, and it's progressed to hundreds, But there were several sharks there, and they're all pretty good size. They're probably reef sharks, and they're probably 6 to 8 foot. But you get a dozen 6 to 8 foot sharks, it's pretty intimidating. And there's really nothing you could do. I remember, and again, this is not something I was taught. It was just like, I felt like I was a genius by, I'm just going to move my weapon in front of my body so they'll bite that first, right? And I'll be fine. But we both looked at each other and we're like, hey, I'd rather take my chances with the guards on land than the sharks. And I was like, me too. So we swam a lot quicker than we normally would have to get to land and progress with the mission. So that was one of my more memorable and first Christmases away from family.
Nice. And that started a little bit before that, right? Like December 20th, I think. And then, and then he didn't
kickoff,
surrender until like January, right? It was like,
I don't remember the day he surrendered actually, because he kind of squandered himself in a Catholic church and, tried to play the amnesty thing. And they surrounded him with like hardcore rock and roll music, and psyops got involved. And eventually he surrendered himself because he realized he was done.
Wow. Crazy. Yeah. Memorable Christmas though.
Yeah.
And at that point you didn't have wife, family yet? Kids?
My wife was my fiance at the time. And I do remember though, they always talked about the Golden Pallet that would show up if you go to war. And so lo and behold, the Golden Pallet arrived. It actually isn't golden, but like all the things on it made it gold. And so every weapon you've ever read about, every explosive, you name it, like it was all there. And it was just like
okay, this is
for
serious.
me.
Yeah.
They're like, you can carry it, you can take it. And so that was also, I remember being a new guy. I remember, and for the military operators listening, you'll think I'm nuts, but I think we all go through this learning curve. That's, the sword I carried at the time was more like a sword, or the knife that I carried at the time was more like a sword. And then I think I had 27 magazines for my M4. I had 24 HE rounds for my 203. I had multiple AT-4 rockets. And because I was just like, I don't know when I'm coming back. They just like send me out into the jungle. And now we all know, like, you don't want to carry that much stuff because, like, it really limits your mobility and you'll probably die. But I used most of it. And so it was very useful.
Yeah. Wow. So a very memorable Christmas. And I'm sure, so when you were growing up, you had, it was cold weather during Christmas, right? Where you grew up. Yeah. So I know some people that listen to this, they might have they might live in Florida where it's just warm.
White Christmas.
Yeah.
Is a myth.
And so when you were spending time in the jungle or in some deployments, maybe in, desert like scenarios, what was it like? Did it feel like Christmas still? Like even because you're
not at all
completely different setting. It's almost like when I've seen like the palm trees with with Christmas lights on. I'm like, it just doesn't seem the same, whatever, than an evergreen. But what were some smells and sights and sounds during the Christmas season when you were deployed that totally threw you off when it come to get you in the mood for Christmas, so to speak?
That I can share on a podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, like for sure. I mean, I would argue even being stationed in Southern California didn't feel like Christmas ever. It's like, and it's 75, 80 again today. So we would actually drive our kids out to Julian in the mountains, and so they could see a little bit of snow and make a snowball. And then they had a nice apple festival. But as far as overseas goes, I guess it depends on where you're at. I mean, someone could score and be stationed in Germany, or Austria or somewhere like that. It's like it's perfect. The Alps and snow and and then they literally have Christmas villages over there. So but where I was at for Christmases, it was always like, again, East Africa is 130 at night or whatever. It was miserable. It's where they filmed the Lake of Saul was nearby, and that was where they filmed the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, and it literally is the hottest place on planet Earth as far as I remember. And I think it's just the surface of the crust of the earth is so thin there. And so, I mean, even camels are standing around just waiting to die. Like, it's just horrible. And the smells there, I mean, you can do a little Google research and see, like, the burn pit registry, like Djibouti and Somalia and those regions. Like, it's some of the worst places on planet Earth to breathe the air. Yeah. So, if I sound congested, it's probably from that deployment from
residual injuries.
And so, the smells, the sights, all of it. Nothing really reminds you of Christmas. I think what helped me.
Well, and there's so many things that are tied to, Christmas traditions that are, like you think of like the weather and, sitting by a fire or the smell of cinnamon or, like evergreen or all that stuff that like when you're deployed in a country that is not anything like that, it's kind of weird to be
Well, and even like I remember, and even if you get the classic foods, like even then it just doesn't seem right. Like I remember being in a safe house one time in the Middle East, and somehow like Alaskan king crab showed up, for the guys, and they're all like, "This is awesome." I was like, "No, that's disgusting." Like no telling how many times that stuff's melted and thawed and been refrozen. Like hard pass. And the guys that enjoyed it only enjoyed it for a moment, as you can imagine.
They regretted it.
Yeah. So it fell flat.
Yeah. So then when you were deployed during Christmas, what was food like? So sometimes, if you're on a base or something, they might have something special, but imagine like in East Africa in a warehouse, you're not getting a full Christmas ham.
Not so much. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever actually been parked anywhere where I had access to a good chow hall. So I didn't get the treats. I've had friends that have been on bases where they roll out and they'll do the turkey, the ham, and all the fixings, and they do a really good job. And so the military certainly tries. And in a lot of these places, they actually have now, or when I was in, I don't know what they have now, but they had pretty decent coffee shops too, especially in Africa. I mean, good grief, Ethiopia right around the country there, or right around the corner. And so we would get some really good coffee, like not, you wouldn't even, it was just like in a brown gunny sack bag, the beans, and someone roasted them, like just real beans showed up from a village somewhere, and you're like, it was money.
That's hilarious. Yeah, so good coffee then. And then tell us a little bit about like when you're missing family. So of course we talked about like traditions and like the weather and all that stuff, how it's just not the same, of course, when you're not back home. But what were those times like when you're thinking of family? Like what kind of got you through? Like what were some things that made it worse maybe? And then what were some things that made it a little bit better?
So I think for the most part, unless operationally it wasn't sound to do so, I always had like a little leather book with pictures of my wife and kids, and she would put in little notes in there. And so that was something I reviewed often, if I was just sitting in my own little hooch. And so that helped. But overall, I would say this goes for most of the people I deployed with. It's pretty lonely, because you do miss. You're missing out on some big things. Recently, I was listening to some old Alabama songs, and one of them talks about how, he saw his daughter grow up in pictures. And so, again, as you're looking at these pictures, you're missing, the first steps, the first whatever. And that weighs heavy on your heart. And I think the one consoling fact was my wife always knew I didn't travel just to travel. Like I traveled because it was part of my job and I was ordered to go somewhere, but I didn't go out of my way to take extra trips, like just to be away from the family. Like she knew if I had to go somewhere, it was because duty called. And so I think that helped having a wife who understood the call that I felt led to respond to. And I think for the most part, the kids understood too. I think what's probably the hardest for any military member, it's the goodbyes. Right? Like, I mean, as my kids got older and they would cry themselves to sleep when I would leave for deployments, especially if they knew I was going to war. I mean, they kind of assume like there's a good chance, that dad's going to be involved in some conflict.
Yeah.
Even if
is that what a lot of Navy SEALs do? Like they're involved in some kind of conflict?
I hear that, I read it in a book once. But I think that's hard is leaving children, because my wife and I would both agree, like when it was just her and I, like not as complicated. But when you leave children, because there's just only so much you can explain to their little minds.
Yeah.
So that weighs heavy on your heart too, because you just feel like, the most horrible dad of the universe. Yeah.
Now, how did the times where you're away from America during Christmas, how did that shape your perspective of Christmas? Like when you were home, did that change your perspective? No, remembering what it felt like to be away?
I would say I would broaden that statement to just being home in general, not just Christmas. I would think my wife would back me up on this. I think the kids would back me up on it. The one thing I heard them say over and over to me was, when dad's home, he's present. When my husband's home, he's present. Like he doesn't talk about work. He's here. He's interested in what we're doing. And so I really treasured those comments, and it kind of breathed life into me when I thought maybe I was not a good husband or a good father. Like to hear from them like, hey, like our dad does this, for big and noble reasons. And so that helped them a lot, to deal with it. And it helped me too. And so I think that was really encouraging. I think the other thing too, and I'm thinking of, like men and women who are listening who are overseas and who might be a little down, like your family prayerfully understands why you do what you do. And like even today, I would just say, like just the other day, I hanged up a new flag. I have a 30-foot flagpole in my front yard, like, and big old 6x10 flag, but I noticed a little tear right where the blue met the red and white stripes. So I was like, that's unsat. Like I got to get a new flag. And, they're not cheap when they're that big size, it's a couple $100. And so I got us a new flag. And every time I bring the old one down, it's like, it's a deep amount of respect, and I think about men and women who are out there so that we can continue to fly a flag like that. Right.
Yeah.
And I love, just bridging to the flag and being home. I think also, just teaching the kids the importance of the flag and reminding them of men and women that are sacrificing much so that we can do a podcast like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And many other things.
Well, and with that, so Christmas is, of course, we know as believers and now as pastors, like Christmas is more than just family traditions, right? And, experiencing cold weather if you're certain parts of the country, or setting up a Christmas tree and all those different things, or good food. How is, with you being a believer in the military, how did that shape how you viewed Christmas too? Like, to encourage other people that you're with during that time? Like, did you ever have some good conversations or gospel conversations in the midst of Christmas season when people were kind of missing home?
Well, to be honest, during Christmas season, I would say they were very brief ones, because the few times I was there, because usually the military does a good job getting you home. It was war, it was conflict, and so you're pretty busy. And so you didn't have a lot of time to just sit around and think about that. And then the one time I mentioned, I was actually by myself. And so I was like, hey, self, let me tell you about Christmas.
Yeah.
But by and large, I would say any deployment opportunities come up to talk, because people do get lonely. Usually they call it hump day, or the 3-month mark in a deployment, if it's a standard 6-month one. Somewhere around that 3-month mark, people start kind of wigging out a little bit. And, you need to start boosting morale. And that's where some people are just, they're wired to be the morale boosters, and that's what I try to train my son, who's, I think, 13 years he's been serving now. And, he knows like how to identify where the group morale is and how to boost it and stuff. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it. And certainly you look for those opportunities to share the hope you have in Christ, especially, when there's loss of life and other hard things that you witness, or maybe seeing the loss of life of others that, you don't even know, but it still lands on your heart because you're human.
Yeah. Now, speaking of being a morale booster, for people that might be listening to this or watching this that are just feeling down for this season, for whatever reason, maybe it's because they've lost a loved one, and this time of season, just reminds them of what they're missing out on, or, what they've lost. Many people listening to this or watching this might not be able to make it home for Christmas to celebrate with their family, or for whatever reason. So what would be an encouragement that you would give, maybe even from God's word, that would help people during the season if they're having a hard time?
Wow, so many things. Even as you mentioned that, I can think of several people in our congregation who've lost their spouses. Some of them are young, right? And some of them, there's many men and women today too. Like we talked about this loneliness. There's some people, like, being home is not a joy. It's being hard. Maybe they have, just a spouse that is just not the most loving person, or maybe it's children that don't have a loving parent. And, just it's rough, right? And I lead a group, on Thursdays where we get men and women together, who are military veterans, law enforcement, firemen, and EMS. But one of our good buddies who attends, he's a retired 2-star Marine Corps pilot, F-18 pilot, and he was a grunt in Vietnam, worked his way up to be a general from an enlisted man. And he said something that it's not new, but it was just a good reminder when someone was bringing up difficulties, and he says, this too shall pass. And I think that's been helpful for me, because throughout my life, it seems like difficult things come my way. And I really do. I kind of recite that to myself. I know it's not a Bible verse technically, even though the Bible talks a lot about, things that will come to be, but it's true. And I've just seen, I've shared previously on this podcast, that 13 years where I had 25 migraines a month. I mean, that was probably one of the most horrible things I went through physically, but it also affected me, I think, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Like, I was just running out of gas and really tired and down. And I'm mindful, and I know you are too, that this life is brief. Like God's word says, we're a vapor.
Yep.
And so I think it's about maximizing this time we have on planet Earth to make an impact for God's kingdom. It's also one of those where, even as I was sharing with you earlier, this Sunday I'm getting ready to preach, Matthew 7, and, just as Jesus closed out the Sermon on the Mount, and eventually closes, with the parable of the two homes and their foundation, right? And so this Christmas season, I would say it'd be a really good time to analyze, what are you building your life on? Like, are you building it on the world, which would equal the sand? And that's what your hope's in, or maybe your good achievements, or, making lots of money, or being famous, or any of those things that are temporary and will pass away? Or are you building it on the rock, Jesus Christ? And because at the end of time, like, you're either going to have a relationship with Jesus or you're not. And that's where, again, in Matthew 7, for those who thought they knew about him, but they didn't know him, he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you. I think it's one of the scariest passages in all the Bible. And I think it's kind of there to really make you assess, are you in the faith? And so it really challenges me. And again, you and I are both wired. We are big fans of grace, and we've experienced it tremendously in our lives. And I just think if I could really help encourage the listener, it's like, make sure you're in the faith. Like, do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Because then no matter what you're going through physically, spiritually, whatever, like, it's temporary.
Yeah.
Compared to eternity, like, bring it on. And I know I don't mean that cliche, and I know there are hard things people are going through that they're like, thanks a lot. That doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
But in comparison to eternity,
Just
my goodness.
just
like,
a quick
endure
sneeze.
and ask God for the endurance to do it, because if you're his, he will.
Yeah. When I think of, people that are, I mean, even if it's not just this time of year, but if they're just going through a difficult season where they just feel like they're hopeless or in despair, I think of John 16:33, like, Jesus says to disciples, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so there's not a promise even for believers that we won't have a difficult time, like in difficult seasons and so, but just, trusting in Jesus. And I think of even, Psalm 23, like where it says that, my cup runs over. Like, Jesus will fill you, and satisfy your needs. And if there's another desire, like, check to make sure that you're desiring the right thing, like that you have a relationship with Jesus and that he's your hope. And then, even going into the future, passage like Revelation 21, like where it's like, I wipe away every single tear. There will be no more death, no mourning, no sorrow, no pain. And so, that gives us hope to hold on, even when things are hard. That pain often equals progress. So even if it's difficult, just like working out, especially with us getting older, it feels harder and it hurts more. But at the same time, like, we're making progress.
Yeah.
Every time you rip those muscles apart, they grow back stronger. And there's micro fractures that we talked about before in the biodome. Yeah. So all that ties into, it's like,
it really does.
We're not designed to have everything easy. Like, God, gives us things to intentionally help us to depend on him.
Well, I even think, just current event this morning, like, sometimes we also make things harder on ourselves. Like, I was doing the right thing. I was working out, and then I knocked a dumbbell off, and I'm pretty sure my toes broke, and it's like, what a reminder to just pause and reflect before you move hastily through your crowded gym.
You might want to have someone look at that.
Yes. Well, what can you do about it? I was like, it's a toe. So,
just rip it off. Just rip it off.
It's like, put some tape on it. You'll be fine. I can hear all my past teammates.
Well, you're a survivor for sure, and you've taught survival to other people. And so before we get into the survival tip, I just want to say, thank you for all your sacrifice as a veteran, and for the Christmases that you spend away, for all the veterans that are listening to this that spend time away from their family. Your service is not overlooked, and so we thank you guys for all that you sacrifice. So you have a survival tip for us today about resin.
Yeah. So I thought, what could be more Christmas than talking about resin, right? And just there's several things when you look in survival books about resin. One, the humorous side, because I'm a big fan of, if I read in a book and it seems like I won't die, I'm going to try it. and so resin, they also call it nature's chewing gum. I was like, I'll give it a shot. And so I scraped a whole bunch of resin off a spruce tree in Alaska, and it was disgusting. And it's not chewing gum.
Was it minty fresh?
Not minty fresh at all. It was more like chewing an oil slick, and it was nasty, and it really probably took 5 or 6 days to get off my teeth. And so don't always recommend, you try everything like that, but I'm a big fan of learning that way. But what resin is useful for is like field crafts. You can gather a whole bunch of it and you can boil it, and then you can take like twigs and you can twirl it and almost make like these little knots of resin, let it cool, and then you could use it for a fire starter. But what I used it for also was if I would make like impromptu weapons, maybe, an axe, or some kind of hammer, or even
was this ever while you were on a mission with the SEALs? Did you have to make your own weapons ever?
No.
Okay, that's what I'm imagining. I'm like, this is awesome. Like
I'm out of everything. I'm going to make a club with a rock, But it's good to know you could.
Yeah.
And so, but I would use that as a glue, and so I would melt it, and then I would kind of like melt it over the cordage that I would use to wrap the weapon part, say an arrowhead or whatever, and really effective for that. And so, and then, a lot of people use it for antiseptics also, and just a lot of neat things.
Now, am I mistaken? Can it be used for like waterproofing too?
It can.
Like a boat? Yeah. Underneath a raft or something?
There's so many things. Obviously, it wouldn't be my first go-to, but again, if you need to waterproof, or even like, you could probably trim out your shelter with it too. You just have to weigh the risk versus the gain. Like, it's also an excellent fire starter.
Yeah.
So like if you line your shelter or your boat, then you decide to, have an open flame, realize you could also, burn down your hooch or your boat. So resin, it's not for everybody. But when you think of Christmas, resin is awesome. And then really I was going to add in there too, pine cones. Pine cones are kind of a cool fire starter. If you got
makeshift toilet paper,
well,
pine cones.
Maybe once.
As long as we're using it the right way. The right way,
yeah. Which end? And so, that was Keith's suggestion. So it was not Todd.
Throwing that out there, never know. It's way better than poison ivy, I can tell you that. Yeah.
That's true. Or giant pushki leaves.
Yes. Yeah. All right, so that's what we have for survival tip today. Use resin.
Resin.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. Well, that concludes another episode today. We hope and pray that you find joy this Christmas, even if you're missing loved ones, even if you're having a difficult time. If you ever need anything, reach out to us. We work at a church. We help a lot of people during difficult times. And so, my email address, keith.seymour@mcleanbible.org. Todd's todd.peters@mcleanbible.org, right? Is that your email address? Yeah. Shoot us an email if you need some help. We'd love to set up a time to talk with you if you're going through a difficult season and just need some prayer. So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.